Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is presented by Sports Turf Managers Association. Leading up to STMA's annual conference, we will be hosting various webinars that preview conference education sessions. Our featured speakers today are Matt Anderson, CSFM, CSE, and Boyd Montgomery, CSFM, CSE, both from the Toro Company. They will be presenting a preview of their conference education sessions, Mowing, Getting Beyond the One-Third Rule, and Applying Business Lessons to Your Sports Field Operations. Attendees will be muted during the presentation. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature. Please type in your questions and Matt and Boyd will answer them during the presentation. Thank you for joining us today. You may go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining, whether it's late morning or early afternoon, wherever you are. Like Kristen said, my name is Matt Anderson and Boyd Montgomery is joining me.
Welcome everybody. Look forward to a great little preview here and hopefully seeing everybody down in Savannah in January.
Absolutely. So the first presentation we're going to preview here, I've called Beyond the One-Third Rule. And really what got me thinking about this was twofold. I've heard a lot of talks about mowing over the years, and a lot of them center around things like mowing heights and talking about reel mowers versus rotary mowers, and just it seems really basic and really entry level. And as I've kind of gotten into the world of Toro, I realized that there's a lot of resources and a lot of things that I'm learning about mowers that I've never heard talked about at a Sports Turf Managers Conference. So I just wanted to share some tidbits with that, some things that I found interesting, and I thought, you know, if I found it interesting, hopefully somebody else will. So let's click through here a little bit, and we'll talk about some of those things. So some of the assumptions about this talk, I don't want it to be an entry-level talk. So we're going to assume a few things. We're going to assume that if you're listening to this presentation, you understand the difference between a reel and a rotary mower. We're going to assume that you understand when you should mow, why you are mowing, and how to do it properly. This is not anything about those topics. We're also not going to discuss equipment maintenance in the context of, you know, preventative maintenance on the machine or anything like that. So what are we going to talk about? We are going to talk a little bit about rotary mowers, a few kind of rotary mower setup items. We're going to go through an overview of terminology we use when we talk about reels, and very specifically about the cutting units and how those cutting units are set up. You know, when are we going to use reels, and what are the options that you can configure a reel mower with, and what are their true purpose? If you look out there, there's a myriad of ways that you can set up a reel mower, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. So we'll hopefully offer a little bit of insight into that. And then I want to touch on the topic of aftercut appearance, or how does the grass look after you've mowed it? And specifically, what happens when things don't look right? We don't worry about it when things look pristine and perfect, but most of us have been around long enough to know that issues can arise, and sometimes those issues can be very frustrating to troubleshoot. So we'll talk about some of those things as well. All right. So getting into some rotary mowers, when we refer to rotary mowers, you can see they come in all different shapes and sizes. Looking at the top right of my screen, you know, just kind of the standard single deck out front rotary, or a wide area mower that has multiple cutting decks, really designed for large acreage, or a contour mower that has smaller independent decks, really designed to follow slopes and contours, but are also popular sports field mowers. Regardless of the type of rotary mower, some of the principles we're going to talk about in terms of unit setup are consistent across all these different types of machines. So rotary mowers generally have three possible types of decks when it comes to how they discharge clippings after they're cut. There's side discharge decks, there are rear discharge decks, and there are recycling, or what some people might call a mulching deck. Again, some of the setup items that we're going to talk about really would be applicable to any of these units. So depending on you know, which of these you utilize in your operation, you should be able to apply some of these principles. So this is one of those things that I've not really seen talked about a whole lot, and that's how to set up rotary blades. So if we jump back real quick, you look at these different deck designs, one thing you notice is they all have multiple blades on them. So whether it's a multiple blade deck or a single blade deck, setting up that blade appropriately is really important. So when you have a multiple blade cutting deck, if you want a consistent appearance to the area you're mowing, you need to make sure that those blades are set basically at the same height off the ground. And I know somebody's probably sitting out there saying, yeah, no kidding. But how do you do that? And really, what is the tolerance to have that function properly? So if you're looking at the mower blades 90 degrees from the direction of cut. So if you're cutting straight ahead, you're looking at the blades kind of straight across, perpendicular to the direction of cut. If you measure the height of each blade tip from the ground to that blade tip, they all need to be within plus or minus 2.5 millimeters. If something is bent or out of whack, or one of those tips exceeds those tolerances, you may notice it in aftercut appearance. It may look like an uneven cut. So how do you adjust that? Well, it really depends on your machine. I would say refer to your owner's manual for that. Could be that the blade is bent, could be that something on the deck is bent, could be that there's an adjustment that you can make, but refer to your owner's manual for that. How should the rotary blades interact with the grass? We call this attitude, or kind of the angle that the blade is interfacing with the turf. So you may think, oh, well, I want that blade flat. And that's not really the case. A flat blade is actually going to continually be touching the turf after you mow it, and can lead to an undesirable appearance. It also causes a little bit more drag on the mowing blade, which can impact machine performance and fuel economy. So if you look at the middle picture here, you obviously don't want the rear of the blade tipped back. You want it, otherwise you're going to be, mowing, at different heights. The bottom picture is where you really want to be. You want the front edge as you're mowing to just be slightly lower than the back edge, so that that's the height of cut, but then the rear of the blade isn't dragging on the grass again. So again, you can set that up, refer to your owner's manual on how you can adjust blade attitude. So jumping into some reels, there's a lot of terminology to go through of what makes up a reel. So I just wanted to run through some of this terminology quickly here. Start in the middle with the shaft. The shaft is what everything mounts to. The spiders are these round discs that mount to the shaft that the actual reel blades are welded into. So the combination of those components, the shaft, the spider, and the blades, that makes up what we call the reel cylinder. So that's only half of the cutting operation of a reel mower. The other two parts are the bed knife and the bed bar. The bed knife is mounted on the bed bar as part of the entire cutting unit. So to round out the cutting unit, the bed bar and the reel assembly, they're mounted in a reel frame, and that's made up of side plates and then a frame that holds everything together. The bed bar pivots on a bolt, and that pivot point is what allows you to adjust that reel to bed knife distance to dial in the cut. So I know we said that we would assume you know how a reel mower cuts, but this is how a reel mower cuts. So it's like a pair of scissors. You see the blades interacting with the bed knife, getting ready to cut paper in that picture. So one thing we'll talk about in a little bit further detail is the clip. So if you look at the distance between the blades on this reel, that's only part of the factor that affects clip rate of a reel mower. We'll at conference, we'll talk in more detail about that. So what are we going to talk about in more detail? We're going to talk about clip rate and factors that can affect that. We're going to talk about the relationship between the bed knife and the reel, including behind center distance. That'll be an important topic we get into, and bed knife attitude. So those terms that we just went through, we'll really use those and reference those terms in the full presentation. So if there's no questions coming through on that, just a couple of more things on reels here.
I'll take it from here, Matt. Thanks for your part, and we'll go into just a few other items that we're going to cover at the session at the conference. That being some of the accessories that you can get on your reel mowers, and rollers play an important part to reel mowing. And on the slide here are some basic reel rollers from the Wileys to the Swagger to the full or solids, and we'll talk about why you would want to use one over the other as we get into our presentation at the conference. Next slide, Matt. As you look at also at some of the other accessories, of course, you've got rear roller, brushes that you can get on your units, groomers as well. So we'll discuss, when would it be proper to put these on? Why would you use them? What elements do they provide to you as you put these on your units and have them interact with your turf? The other aspect that we'll be talking about that Matt mentioned is really that after cut appearance, the quality of cut, and how mowers can interact with that, if it be something that is done through the setup of the machine, or is it potentially an agronomic aspect that we have to consider as we look at some of these factors as we go forward. Next slide, Matt. So we'll look at and we'll spend probably a good part of the time talking about troubleshooting that after cut appearance, and remembering to consider all the factors that go in. Not only is it, like I mentioned, the equipment setup. Is it something that has been tweaked in adjustments? Is it something that maybe is agronomically going on with the turf right now that, based on the way it was originally set up, we haven't adjusted to accommodate for that? So we'll talk about how do you really try to make sure that both the agronomic conditions that you are trying to address, and the machines are set up properly to give you the best quality of cut and after cut appearance when you look at that. Some useful tools we'll talk about as well would be, a prism gauge, and being able to have that as a tool for you to be able to get down on your knees and sort of look at, what is really the net result of the machine, and as we've used it on the turf and cut the turf. And then some of the common ACA issues that we'll discuss as we get at conference would be things like bobbing, clip marks, grain, mismatch, overlay marks, scalping, stragglers, tire tracks and streaks. So we'll get into those a lot more in detail and sort of, show some of the photo evidence of those and talk on why they might be happening. What are some of the factors, and how would you go about trying to make sure that you're adjusting your machine properly so you're not seeing some of those as we go forward. And with that, if there's no other questions, we'll get in and just touch on briefly our other presentation that Matt and I will be doing at conference, which is really applying business lessons to your turf, sports turf operations. And really, this presentation is going to be an interactive conversation, and it's going to be around some of these topics as far as communication, teamwork, the use of data, managing the P&L, sales and presentations, self-confidence, and personal brand. And in this presentation, we'll touch on one of them right now, which would be self-confidence and personal brand. And Matt, I'll let you sort of maybe give us some scenarios and talk about the next slide there.
Yeah, so interesting to think about this topic here. When it comes to self-confidence, just to share a personal story, I know when I was young in my career, I would have been terrified to do something like this, to get up in front of a group of peers and share something that I thought was relevant and useful. If that's you, or you lack self-confidence, maybe it's not public speaking, but maybe there's something else, you just have to jump in and do it. And everybody has their thing, but projecting that confidence will carry you well in your careers.
Matt, I think
go ahead, Boyd.
Another good point is, I guess, to put it back to probably what everybody could relate to at some time in your life. Think about it when you're trying to learn how to ride a bike. And, you first off start out with the training wheels. You've got that that foundation there. You feel fairly confident. Okay, if something happens, it's not going to go. Mom and dad are right next to me. But then it comes the day that those training wheels come off, and maybe your mom and dad say, all right, you're on your own. Let's see how you go. And, you probably fall a few times, but you had, those folks that were in your corner cheering you on, giving you encouragement, keep on trying. And lo and behold, you kept on getting back up, hopefully. And at one point, you probably were very successful riding the bike, maybe even with no hands at one point. So those type of things, I think, are important to relate to as you look at trying to make sure you have that confidence. Not everybody's going to succeed, but it's one of those things where you got to keep on trying. You learn from your mistakes and keep on going.
So on the personal branding piece, I guess putting my parent hat on a little bit, one of the things that I've been discussing with my son lately is, he'll say something like, well, I'm not being mean. And my response to him is always, if somebody thinks you're being mean to them, you're being mean to them. And it's how they perceive you that you need to be aware of. So when it comes to your personal brand, if people think you're hard to deal with, you might disagree with that, but if you're hard to deal with to them, you're hard to deal with. And you need to, you need to have that self-awareness of how you're being perceived, because it can, I've heard enough stories where that can impact people's careers or their career progression because they get a reputation. So just be aware of what your personal brand is. Be aware of what you're projecting to those around you, whether they're coworkers or, leadership at your organization. And just be aware of how you're being perceived out there.
Yeah, I think, some of the, I think it was Jeff Bezos once said that, your brand is what people say when you're not in the room. So to Matt's point, it's that perception. It's what people think, the impressions that you leave, the experiences, those type of things that they've had as they interact. So, when you look at your personal brand, some of those, you want to be focused on that. You want to make sure that you've got focus around there. You're being genuine. Tell stories. Stories are something that people can relate to most of the time. Be consistent with your messaging. Be positive. And no one likes to be around a negative person. It just seems to bring everything down. So always try to look for the positive side of things. It's one of those where you look at, we always have plenty of challenges in our lives. Change the word challenge to opportunities. We have plenty of opportunities in our life to look at it in a different perspective as we go. And, and your brand is one of those things that I think is important as you, as you look at, where you want to go in your life and your career. And it can play a big part, like Matt said, in how successful you are. So I think this goes back to, when you look at a few of these slides that we threw in here, and we'll dive deeper into them in the presentations. Do you truly understand who you are? I think Matt brought up a great point when he mentioned this, is you really have to sort of take that step back and really understand yourself before you're going to be successful at understanding others and working with others. So, I think, having that ability to look back, understand, where you maybe have some strengths, where you might have some weaknesses, and I'm a firm believer of one of those where, everybody's going to have weaknesses. It's probably not, unless they're detrimental, it's probably not something that you really want to focus on. How do you maximize those strengths that you have? How do you really grow on that? And that's where that self-confidence comes from. I think it helps you out as you go. I always like the quote here on the bottom of this with Vince Lombardi. And, if you're not fired with enthusiasm, you will be fired with enthusiasm. So, make sure you're passionate about what you want to do. You have that self-confidence. You're excited about where you're going. So we look, this is sort of that snip of how our presentations will go at conference. And hopefully you guys got a good look at these, and we look forward to more interactions when we get to conference. Matt, I'll turn it to you if you have anything else.
No, I think that's it. I don't see any questions that came in the Q&A. So, Kristen, I think that's it, unless there's anything else.
I don't think so. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to contact Matt or Boyd outside of this, or just wait until we're all in Savannah. So again, thank you, Matt and Boyd, and thank you all for joining us today. These presentations will be featured at STMA's annual conference, so make sure you come prepared with questions. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the week.
Thanks everybody. Everyone.